Jesus Christ, I cannot wait for this project to be over. Welcome, everybody from all walks of life, to the third and final entry in my Paper Mario Retrospective. First, we looked at Paper Mario for the Nintendo 64, then we looked at Paper Mario the Thousand Year Door for the GameCube, and finally, we're looking at Super Paper Mario for the Wii. This video will have spoilers for pretty much everything in this game, and I'll also be making heavy references back to the first two videos, so you should look back at those first. I really hope you enjoy this one because I know I'll enjoy getting this off my mental checklist. Let's do it. Super Paper Mario was released for the Nintendo Wii in 2007. It was originally being developed as a GameCube title before being silently transitioned over to the Wii. Although it's a fairly beloved title nowadays, back at release, I remember hearing a lot of mixed feedback. It didn't make a whole lot of sense to me since, as a 5th grader who just got his Wii for Christmas, it was just another fun Mario game. I borrowed it from a friend and I enjoyed what I played, but the time came for me to give it back, so I didn't finish it until I bought my own copy in the spring of 2016. By then, I had the context of the full series, and I could see why the backlash was a thing. The game went for a direction more adjacent to Mario's regular 2D platforming adventures. In the process, it dropped a lot of the things we'd come to expect from previous games in the Paper Mario series. However, today, a lot of people really enjoyed this game's writing and especially its tone. My first playthrough did not sit well with me, so I was a bit of a detractor. The second playthrough also left a pretty foul taste on my buds. This will be my third full playthrough of the game, and that's the perspective I'm coming from in this review. So, is this game any good, or am I gonna bludgeon it to death with my self-righteous semantic spear? Man, I don't know. But what I do know is that it's time for a Super Paper Mario long-form review. Super Paper Mario's intro. Okay, for the sake of brevity, I'm referring to this game as Super from now on, just a heads up. But anyway, Super's intro hits you with a ton of exposition right out of the gate. It took until the very end for TTYD's story to totally lose it, but here it happens within a couple seconds, as the game starts describing an ancient book of prophecies that could end the world, and then showing us a forced wedding between Peach and Bowser being officiated by this guy called Count Bleck. I mean, we'll get back to that in a second because I need to finish a running joke real quick. The game starts off on a boringly chill and pleasant note, at least according to Luigi. This gets quickly subverted as the bros get alerted that Princess Peach has been kidnapped once again, and they head off to Bowser's castle to do something about it. Turns out, he hasn't actually kidnapped the princess yet. It was actually this Count Bleck guy who knocks Mario out and then kidnaps literally everybody. Mario gets awakened by a pixel named Tippy and taken to a town between dimensions called Flipside, where Merlin, returning as a cameo from the first game, tells Mario that he's a hero of prophecy and needs to collect 8 pure hearts to stop a giant void from consuming the multiverse. Yes, all of this gets dumped on you at the beginning of the game, and yes, it feels like a dump truck full of lore running into your stomach. The worst part about it is that these cutscenes take like 20 minutes before you're even able to start playing, and once you are able to, you just walk. That's the first thing the game teaches you. To be fair, there's not really any reason to force you into a combat encounter, but this also means the game doesn't really have the opportunity to teach you anything meaningful until the first world actually starts. The most useful thing you learn here is that you can interact with things by pressing up on the Wii Remote's D-pad. Well, actually, that's not entirely true. You do learn about some slightly obscure mechanics like the menu and the return pipe, but these don't mean anything during the moment-to-moment gameplay, so they have to go out of your way to teach you about them. This tutorial might technically be shorter than either Paper Mario 64's or the Thousand Year Door's, but it's also the least fun and the least useful. At least both of those games had the decency to actually teach you things and spread out their exposition a bit. This just makes you read for almost half an hour before you actually get to do anything. For the sake of not being too negative at the very start of the video, I will say that 20 minutes has some of the best dialogue in the series, courtesy of Luigi and Bowser. I remember when Color Splash was being shown off at Nintendo's Treehouse live back in 2016, one of those guys was talking about how much fun they had translating Super specifically, and it shows. It's really funny and unique stuff. It's just kind of a shame that this opening section jams so much crazy Paper Mario storytelling into the opening scenes without balancing it out at all. I think it's pretty clear from this footage that Super Paper Mario is very different from its predecessors. This is, in fact, no longer a traditional RPG, but instead a platformer action-adventure game with RPG elements. That is probably the weirdest combo of words I've ever had to say, but the point is, this game is its own beast, and I want to review it on its own terms. It wouldn't be fair of me to say that this game is awful because it isn't like the originals. I mean, it deserves a chance, right? That being said, is there anything that it does have in common with the previous two games? Because if so, I want to take a look at that. What do we got? This game's art style definitely has its own flair. After the previous two games took on a pop-up book come to life sort of appearance, this game goes for a far more digital aesthetic. Its angles like, your computer screen is two-dimensional, so it's not so much paper as it's paper-like. Everything is made of cubes and has a more square shape, and everything is given simplistic textures to go along with this style. I can definitely see its appeal, and I do like how a lot of the characters use this geometric style, especially Ochunks, Dementio, and Merlin. I also think that the Kragnons, King Crocus, and King Sammer look really cool in this style, but I really don't dig it on most of the normal NPCs like the Flipside people. They look way too weird. It's kind of off-putting to me. Don't even get me started on the pixels. They look like rejected Kirby's Epic Yarn characters. I know Kirby's Epic Yarn came out like 3 years later, but you know what I mean. They stick out like a bajillion sore thumbs, even more so because they're planted next to the rounder, regular Mario characters for the entire game. And personally, the environments left a lot to be desired as well. They're all boxy and angular, which looks especially grody when you flip to 3D. I mean, how unattractive can your game's worlds be? I'll say that the textures and level themes give each individual world a distinct tone, but as far as the level design itself goes, I was very let down by the actual geography. It feels like a bunch of generic platforming levels trying to dress up like a living, breathing world, which is a massive step back from both of the previous games. But the team was trying something new. I'm happy to give them credit for that. Like I said, a lot of the level themes were really nice to look at. Gloam Valley, Lineland Road, the Bitland Plains, they all look fantastic, and some of the character designs pull off the made of squares look quite nicely. On the whole though, I don't think this part of the experimentalism quite worked out. So what about the gameplay? How'd that gamble go? Like I said earlier, this game is a mishmash of a side-scrolling platformer, an action-adventure game, and familiar RPG elements. Compared to previous entries, they're obviously trying something very new out for this third entry. I want to say up front that those three distinct styles do mesh together surprisingly well, but I wanted to evaluate each of the elements on their own. So here we go. The platforming in this game is pretty great. Mario's full jump feels unnaturally high. That was never a hunch I was able to shake, but his mid-air control feels natural. I never felt unconfident making jumps. Mario, Peach, Bowser, and Luigi, they all feel pretty great to control. My main issue lies in the lack of a sort of dash. I feel like not only would the platforming be enhanced by allowing the player to have some control over their character's momentum, but it would also really help make areas that are otherwise totally barren go by more quickly. After you clear out rooms or segments that just have enemies or blocks and end up having to backtrack, it takes forever to get back with nothing interesting to do, and a dash would have mitigated that somewhat, as well as allowed for some more interesting platforming. There is a dash pixel you can get by beating the Pit of 100 Trials in Flipside, but it should have been part of the main moveset if they wanted this to be an homage to classic 2D Mario. Paper Mario has always had action-adventure elements, although these were usually saved for dungeons where you'd be solving puzzles and navigating areas by memorizing their layouts, whereas in regular areas you'd just be exploring and battling. But in this game, every level is kind of its own mini dungeon for the most part. They all have miniature puzzles that require different character abilities or quest items, at least a couple per level, so you have to do some backtracking and keep suspicious areas or hints in mind during each level. They're never really that complicated in and of themselves, but you may get stuck on what you're even supposed to do at times because of just the excessive amount of abilities you have. I mean, here, let's list them out. Mario can flip into the third dimension, which is its own discussion we'll get to in a bit. Peach can block attacks and glide using her parasol. Bowser is heavy and does double damage, and he can also breathe fire, and Luigi can wind up a special super hop. That's a pretty diverse set of moves, but wait, there's also the pixel abilities. Throw allows you to grab and throw things like blocks or enemies. Boomer yells about how much better his work ethic is than yours. Slim lets you turn sideways and be essentially invisible. Thudley allows you to perform the classic ground pound. Carry allows you to cross over spikes and move around a lot more quickly. Fleep can flip parts of the screen, which can open dimensional rifts. Cudge allows you to swing a hammer. And Dottie shrinks you down to microscopic size. And there are even some optional pixels. I already mentioned Dashel, who allows you to run faster. Barry gives you a spiky shield to use pretty much at will. That's very helpful for crowd control. To get him, you just have to revisit Chapter 3-1 after beating Francis. And Piccolo can cure status ailments and is unlocked after a stupid long trading sequence. And finally, you can point at the screen with Tippy to get a tattle on enemies or to point out invisible stuff. I just wrote an entire page explaining all of your basic abilities. None of them are very versatile if we're being honest. So when those get combined into a chain of exploring and puzzles, the level has to stop and wait for you to figure out what move you even need. This is made even worse because you have to swap out your characters and pixels in the menu, and even though there's a quick access version of the menu, it still halts everything so you can pull the right ability out of your pants. I feel like most of these abilities could be combined or flat out removed to make for a much more natural feeling experience. Here's how I would improve it. First of all, nobody's doing anything with the A button besides Mario, so they all might as well be able to flip. There's nothing about this mechanic that needs to be specific to Mario, so make him special by giving him his hammer to use by swinging the Wii remote on the ground. Cudge does not need to be here. While we're on the subject of pixels we don't need, Dottie's out of here. Shrinking is really only used a couple of times, so we really don't need it. If anything, Slim could also double as the paper tube ability from TTYD to access areas with tiny entrances. Dashel is out of here. That should be a move you can do by double tapping on the D-pad. Piccolo is out of here. Fetch quests are so 90s, dude. And Fleep is out of here because I don't like him. There, that cleans up things for the most part. There'd still be plenty of problems where you run into a situational puzzle that has the most obvious solution ever, but at least the really undynamic ones are taken care of, and we have a far more natural feeling moveset, I think. The main issue I had in this game are moments where you have no clue what to do, so then you just flip to 3D and the solution becomes glaringly obvious. So I think allowing all the characters to do that instead of just Mario would make those moments feel a lot less annoying. While we're on the subject of the flip mechanic, what is up with this camera angle? It constantly has to clip whenever you're backtracking, and again, the visuals here are very yucky. And the flip meter, I'm sorry, but it just needs to be way more generous. What's the point of limiting exploration to a few seconds when I could just be cruising along? It needs at least double the time on it so I'm not stressing out when I'm literally just walking from point A to point B, or when I have to flip multiple times in succession to get a puzzle done. The action-adventure elements in Super are unfortunately incredibly mediocre. They need some serious cleaning up. I think my moveset would be a huge improvement, but even then, there's tons of wrinkles that still need smoothing out. Really, its only saving grace is the exploration, because it's combined with the well-done platforming. But what about the combat? The combat in this game takes a more action-oriented approach, as it all takes place in real time, using Mario's familiar stomp and other physical blows to deal damage, while you avoid bumping into enemies. While there are some neat techniques you can take advantage of, and plenty of enemy types with semi-different behaviors, and a bit of a higher skill ceiling as you can shake the Wii Remote with good timing to do stylish tricks, the main reason to deal with enemies is just to clear out the screen. You could get through this game without leveling up very much, but at least the leveling system is interesting. It's probably the only game I've ever played where a score means anything extrinsic, as you build it up and at certain points you raise your HP and your attack power every other level. I wish you still had the option to choose what to upgrade, although the lack of FP or badges would make that choice kinda bland, so I get what they were going for. Now while I wouldn't say combat ever really gets boring per se, it definitely gets easy to break, especially after Chapter 3. During this chapter, you unlock Bowser as a playable character. Like I said, he deals double damage because he's heavier and breathes fire. The trade-off is supposed to be that he can't move while breathing fire, and he by default moves more slowly, making you more vulnerable than normal. But when you get carry, you can move super quick as Bowser and still do double damage, which allows you to totally break combat in half. Plus moves like the barrier, the hammer, and a lot of items allow you to break it into further fractions by stun trapping or cornering enemies constantly. The combat is always in your favor, so enemies are more a speed bump than an enjoyable roadblock. So while it's an excellent core concept, they needed to do a lot more balancing to keep the combat challenging and more interesting, in my opinion. If I didn't mention the multiple technical difficulties I experienced during my playthrough, I feel like that would be irresponsible on my part as a reviewer. I was using what I found out about 7 chapters in was a very faulty Wii Remote. It kept disconnecting constantly, and the pointer would just not pick up most of the time, but then sometimes it would pick up way too well. Like, it was so weird. My Wii console completely froze twice, and the second time it like temporarily died. That was very demoralizing, but luckily I was able to reset the AC adapter and I didn't lose anything. Still, almost losing a 10-year-old console was panic attack inducing for me. Did any of this have a bearing on how I perceived the gameplay? A little. I got really tired of the Wii Remote's BS as the game went on, and after the second and more drastic freeze, I kinda wanted the levels to be shorter so I could make good progress before the next potential freeze. But despite everything, I had a good time with this mishmash of parts. It's a Mario game with a big budget, so it's guaranteed to be at least a little fun. On the whole though, after a 16-hour playthrough, I'd say Super's gameplay is okay. It juggles so many ideas that it doesn't really do that mind-blowingly at any of them. The platforming is the best part of it all. It functions fine enough and makes the exploration fun. Unfortunately, this game is plagued by puzzles that range from basic and boring to obtuse and frustrating, and it has some less than stellar combat. So this part of the experiment, like the art style, unfortunately, also didn't quite pan out. Luckily, this game maintains the individual chapter plots from the previous 2 games, so let's hope that they hold up just as well. This game's chapters are certainly unique to say the least. Like I've done before, I am issuing an official proclamation. Thou shaltn't watch any further if this game has not been played by thyself. That is, the viewer. Take that warning as you will, and let's dig in. Chapter 1's very interesting as it takes two of Mario's best known level tropes and combines them into one chapter. I really love this because it shakes your expectations right off the bat and the worlds get even more bonkers from here. But since we're on the subject of Chapter 1, I really love all the characters you meet here. Bestovius being a greedy buttface is hilarious. It's a great subversion of the hero just gets what they need trope that we don't often think about in games. The red and green bridge guys crack me up, especially green. Chunks gets his formal introduction as a boss here, and I love him. Scottish accents are one of my secret favorite things in the universe, so as you can imagine, Chunks is one of my very favorite Mario characters. Dimentio shows up and makes a mysterious first impression. You're gonna want to keep an eye on him. But it's because of Dimentio that Fractale wins the funniest character of the chapter award. He gets a very tragic ending, something that's kind of a running theme in this game, but if there's anything good old Doug Walker taught me, it's that suffering is comedy, so therefore this is funny. This is a brilliant first chapter, and it gives you a very, very tiny taste test of what's to come. Speaking of, Chapter 2 is where the game really gets interesting. The bog setting is visually striking, and it's unfortunate it only gets used for one level. I'm getting a bit ahead of myself here, but Gloam Valley is one of the best songs in the game. But the mansion is just as great as a location. Mimi leading you into a bunch of tricks and traps is a great little section, but the third level where you break her favorite vase is undeniably the best one. She makes you do labor to pay off a 1 million ruby debt, and while the gameplay is obviously not very engaging, encouraging you to tune out more than anything, it would honestly kind of fail at making you feel like you're doing hard labor if it didn't do that. But the monotony of it all encourages you to look for easy outs, and you can get into the VIP workroom and even bust into the vault upstairs with a bit of searching. The ending portion is also one of the best levels of the game because the game drops the most nightmare fuel thing in the Mario series on you and turns the game into a temporary survival horror. We all know how I feel about that. Look at my Resident Evil review. There it is. Watch it. It is legitimately scary to have Mimi pop into the current room, so you feel like you always have to keep moving. But the writers flipped this on its head too by dumping you into a quiz show as Mimi shapeshifts into Merlee, forcing you to deduce the real deal and the freaky faker, but they make the answer obvious from a glance. Everything about the horror, the tension, and the comedy in this chapter just all comes together to make one of the best in the game. Gosh, it's just so cool. Alright, it's the moment all 6 of you have been waiting for. Is Super's third chapter as good as the other chapter 3s in the series? Well, chapter 3 sees Tippy getting nerd-napped by Francis, this total incel chameleon who's obsessed with photography and pop culture. So you have to traverse these 8-bit lands, encountering a variety of different environments on your way to Fort Francis. And guys, I have to say, this chapter is a freaking blast. The 8-bit art style used on the environments is not only fantastic, but the level design also makes a lot of clever little nods to older Mario games, but it doesn't overdo it. You also explore a huge ocean, which has a huge blooper boss that's a lot of fun. Then you go up a giant tree, solving puzzles as you climb your way to the top. They aren't brain busters or anything, but it's fun to slow down and figure things out in this level. Dimentio's first boss encounter is here as well, a decent little fun fight that takes advantage of his magician persona to make some mind-boggling attacks, and Dimentio has some of the best dialogue in this whole game straight up. Like I've said previously in this series, magician and witch characters are some of my favorite things ever, and so this fight is a real treat for me. But none of this compares to how bananas Fort Francis itself is. Imagine the ultimate geeky little hidey hole. That's what this place is. It's full of posters, some of which are references to the Thousand-Year Door, and cat robots. This place has the most off-kilter feel out of anywhere in the whole game, and that's kind of saying a lot. They stretched the crow section's bizarre and charmingly out-of-place dialogue into an entire level here. Making fun of nerd toxicity and entitlement isn't the sort of bandwagon you'd expect Nintendo themselves to jump on. I mean, let's be honest, it's probably where at least half of their revenue comes from, but they do it so flawlessly. It's also super impressive how, despite this game being 13-ish years old, this satire holds up. Add on a bizarre and awkward dating sim parody where Paper Peach gets to flaunt more of her headstrong personality, and you have the best Chapter 3 out of all of them. Here's another award. If there was one teeny tiny itsy bitsy thing I could nitpick, Francis should have been some kind of clubba to tie the trilogy together, but that's literally nothing in the grand scheme of things. I love this chapter, and it's definitely the best out of Super's selection, as bits and pieces of the rest of them fall a bit short. Speaking of... Chapter 4 starts off with a neat subversion. Turns out Mario actually can't breathe in space. So you first have to get a helmet by dumping a fish in a pond. What a clever little moment. But anyways, yes, this chapter takes place in space. So they shake things up a bit further and give you some light shooting gameplay and then some regular platforming with various gravity-centric mechanics. This game came out 7 months before Super Mario Galaxy, so seeing these types of mechanics is pretty dope. But the rest of the chapter is garbage, and here's why. First of all, the story is the worst. Squirps is an annoying little brat, and I never felt any reason to care for him. I don't care if he has mommy issues or whatever, he's just a total piece of trash. There's absolutely nothing charming or funny about him. Same with these weird belly button aliens. They were all just jerks for no reason, especially this old guy, and don't even get me started on the gameplay and missions. The little planet and the woe zone aren't inherently terrible, but the woe zone constantly inverting your controls made it way more complicated to explore than it should have been. Planet Blobule may be seethed with anger and idiocy. Here's what happened. I get to the end where there's this old dude and he says he'll sell me a key item for 1,000 coins. Yeah, you see my problem. So I had to leave space and revisit a bunch of previous levels and sell all my items for cash. I maxed out at 999 coins, so I assumed the bit would be that that was the max I could give, so he begrudgingly fork it over. Well, it turns out you're supposed to talk to him again and he'll drop the price to 100 coins. Yes, I will own it. It was my fault for sure. But I'm still salty about it. I was saddled with 999 coins for pretty much the rest of the game, and I didn't even get a good reward out of it. I just got this French idiot that you use maybe 5 times the entire game. The space shooter gameplay sucks. Enemies can come in from everywhere, but you can only shoot from side to side. That's not so bad, but why is my character slipping all over the place? That would be fine if I stopped moving and I drift a bit, because there's no gravity, but slipping around all the time makes the combat and even basic navigation near impossible to get good at in the short time you spend in this section. It's not like navigating the individual screens is even satisfying, because all the portals and backgrounds are nearly identical, making it impossible to tell what takes you where and which way you're even supposed to go. What a miserable chapter. Does it have any saving graces? Well, it's not that long, except for the part when I wasted my own time, but at least I got a couple extra levels out of it, so that's not so bad. The music is really nice, it has a good spacey feel to it, and here we get introduced to Mr. L, who not only kicks Squirps in the face, but he's also just in general one of the best concepts for any Mario character ever. His boss fight even uses the shooter gameplay in a way that was actually not terrible. I kinda wish it was longer. So at least the very ending of the chapter is good, but the rest of it is super paper miserable. Hopefully my revisit to chapter 5 is better. Despite a mediocre start and an initial bad impression, this chapter is actually a lot of fun, and has a really good story to boot. Unfortunately, some of the bits it chooses to toss in your path really blow. 5-1 is my new definition of boring, because there's not really any standout platforming. All there is talking with this guy to learn the order to hit 2 sets of blocks. And having to say please 6 times is not funny. Like, what's supposed to be funny about this? Dang bro, you got the whole party laughing. 5-2, 5-3, and 5-4 are nice stages though. They aren't too big, and their objectives require you to pay attention to your surroundings, which coupled with the small size means you have to put together the answer on your own in a scenario that isn't totally against your tiny human brain. I unfortunately had a bad attitude when I started 5-3 because of a little personal story. This video was produced while I was under mandatory quarantine due to being exposed to the virus, and I was zooming with some friends while playing it, and I didn't really pay any attention to the objective at first, so I hated it. but later once I actually knew what was going on, I had a really great time. Flint Cragley is just another Flavio, and interestingly has all the same writing problems as him. Kind of an epic fail on the developer's part. The regular Cragnons are a hoot and a half though. Whoever came up with the idea of combining the caveman speech cliche with total dude bro talk was a genius. King Crocus may be an easy boss, but he has just enough character to still be memorable, not to mention the twist that the Cragnons made him go nuts by polluting the river. That adds depth to this entire chapter and flips the entire narrative on its head. Despite a rough start, this world won me over in time, and I'm glad the chapter made a swift recovery after the drudgery of its predecessor. This chapter sees Mario and co joining King Sammer's tournament. You have to beat 100 of these hilarious little guys. All 100 of their little spiels are inspiring comedy writing. None of them are all that difficult on their own, but when you have to survive a bunch of tiny fights all in a row, the damage can really stack up, so it's good to make use of some items here. However, this game smacks you in the face with a depressing twist. The void grows too large in this world and consumes everything. All that's left is, well, mostly nothing. And an empty pure heart. Although Mr. L's revamped Brobot is super easy, something feels uneasy about having a fight like this over the grave of a former world. Stuff like this makes Super Paper Mario even darker than TTYD, and this consistent maturity makes it the darkest game in the whole Mario franchise if you ask me, but the game isn't done yet. After literally being murdered in front of everyone, Mario, Peach, and Bowser are separated and spread across the underwear. Not only is this the funniest joke in the game, it's also the funniest bit in the game as they commit to the dark humor and hellish imagery. The River Twigs is the scariest location in any Mario game simply because of the music alone, and having Queen Jades rule everything is a great reference to Greek mythology. D-men, ghastly forms whose dialogue implies their goofed up jumps and deaths from previous Super Mario Bros. Games, everything. It just comes together to make this world stick out as much as possible. It's absolutely genius. But it gets better as you start exploring the over there, Mario's equivalent to heaven, I guess. Not only do you find Peach here, who is hilariously the only party member here, the dudes all get sent to hell to pay for their sins. You have to collect various fruits, which there's no way that's not a reference to Revelation's description of the new tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The atmosphere here is so great. I listened to the music nonstop for almost 2 hours, and I didn't get tired of it once, and the visual assets were pleasing to the eyes as well. Unfortunately, the level design in this chapter did something to be desired. The underwear is way too straightforward for its own good. It feels like it wants to get itself over with, except not really, because it throws you backwards to this D-man in the middle of 7-2 to get this hag's dieting book, which makes you redo the 2 platforming challenges in between. What the hey, I hate biz like this. The 3 door guys trivia was hilarious, but although the actual RPG gameplay would be great as a joke in a standalone game, given the greater context of the Paper Mario series, it kind of rubbed salt in the wound, seeing as how this game's combat pales in comparison to the previous 2 games. The over there has the opposite issue. It's way too eager to never end. It has you doing a lot of exploring for obscure doors hidden out of view to collect a lot of trinkets, and with all the clouds and columns looking the same, oh, you know what that means. It's time for me to get lost for significant periods of time. Fortunately, like I said, the atmosphere kept me from getting super frustrated, so it's no biggie. The boss was unintentionally hilarious though, because with Luigi, he is the biggest pushover in the game. I mean, look at this. Are you seeing this? I'm dragging out this voice line a little bit, but you know, here it is. There, see, you literally saw the entire fight. I also enjoyed this chapter's story a lot. Love Beat really annoyed me on previous playthroughs, but for some reason she really clicked with me this time. Her Shakespearean speech paired with a childish demeanor made for an interesting character, and while she doesn't play nice with anyone, her love for her parents does make the heart under her rough exterior evident. Basically, she's a 50,000,000% improved Squirps, and that makes her argument with her parents at the ending feel very real and grounded. She feels hurt and betrayed, but her immaturity still shines through, making this kind of relatable to anyone who's ever had a big argument with their parents. A great ending to the main chunk of the game. Super has the worst set of interludes purely on the basis that they have almost nothing going on. For the most part, they're just drawn out extensions of what Paper Mario 64 did. You have to explore Flipside and later on the parallel town of Flopside and use new powers to put the pure hearts in heart pillars, unlocking the magic door to the next chapter's world. Although I do miss the incredibly intricate and world-expanding interludes from the Thousand Year Door, with again the obvious exception to this in Super being the discovery of Flopside, the scaled back approach is fine and lets you just leisurely explore the town. Unlike Toad Town from 64 though, Flipside has a very confusing and massive layout, especially when you consider that you have 2 versions of the town to explore for one of 8 pillars. At a certain point I just got out a guide because it's impossible to know where to even start looking for the next one, and it felt overly daunting. These interludes are also kind of lame because they don't have any extra playable characters. There are a couple segments towards the very beginning where you control Peach and Luigi, but these just lead into their further roles in the story as a playable character and Mr. L respectively. That's all the interludes are here for really though, moving the overarching story along. Generally, this comes in the form of seeing this text that's describing an ill-fated love story from some undefined point in the past, then checking in with the Count and his affiliates, setting up their next move for the coming chapter, and then upon returning to Flipside, Merlin tells you more about prophecies and the 4 heroes and the Purity Heart and stuff. Count Bleck's minions often pop in for a mini-boss in the middle of chapters, but this doesn't really matter to the main plot at first. Dementio constantly notes the party's strength, making us wonder if he's even on Count Bleck's side, and when he makes out Chunks into a crazed plant person and then nabs a Sprout for later, it only adds to the mystery. Mimi stalling you in Chapter 6 also further fuels the desperation heading into the plot twist. While the interludes themselves aren't all that great in terms of gameplay, seeing more of the story is great, because the story is great. It's a bit convoluted, having a lot of moving parts and consistent explanation, which is so out of place for Mario, but that's kind of why it gels with me so well. I know that's why a lot of other players love it. I will say, even though it front loads a butt ton of setup, the rest of it is spread out enough to keep you engaged. Future installments do not need a story this complicated, because I think these sorts of love stories and stuff about prophecies are a bit too un-Mario to make it a constant storytelling style. But for one game, it's really awesome, and it doesn't get in the way of another great set of individual chapter storylines. One of them may have totally sucked God's green ass, but the rest of them were enjoyable despite some repetitive or confusing level design. This game's sense of personality is just as big as previous entries, but sometimes I feel it actually goes a bit overboard. Most characters have a good balancing act, like Merlee, Francis, Count Bleck and all of his minions, Peach, Bowser, and then Tippy gets the most development overall. But then there's characters like Squirps and Flint Cragley who are super one-note and totally suck. These chapter-specific characters are nothing compared to the Pixels because there's even less to these guys. Every time you find one, they pop out and they're like, whoa, it's crazy time, whoa. It's just like, bro, you're not a character, you're an item. Can you just, let's chill out. But then that's a total monkey paw because then they shut up forever. It's not just a downgrade to the partners concept from Thousand Year Door, where they were actual characters from the Mario universe teaming up with you, and that had a continual personality. It's also a huge downgrade from 64, where even though your partners shut up right after you met them, they had unique designs and had more unique personalities than these guys. They even piped up again a few times. The Pixels never do that. They never develop or change or anything. That being said, across the board, most of the characters, even just NPCs, are well characterized. I even remember a couple of specific random dudes that I talked to because they stuck out that well. The humor in this game is among the best of the first trilogy, and I found myself laughing out loud verbally in my dorm room at ungodly hours tens of times. That's infinitely more than I burst out at either of the other two games. I may have had a huge smile on my face the whole time, but as a comedy, this game takes the Microsoft Paint flavored cake. That definitely needs to stick around in future installments. I think Tippy is the best character in the game though. As far as this narrative goes, she's essentially the main character. When you first meet her, she ends all of her sentences with ellipses. You can just tell she feels very lost and purely down to business. But after being rescued at the end of chapter 3, her surprise and joy at being saved causes her to start trusting Mario and friends, and being open to a new relationship, it brings that world's pure heart into being. And I did say new relationship. Those black text boxes from between chapters are about her and Count Bleck, formerly Lady Timpani and Lord Blumiere. She has amnesia at the beginning of the game, but the pain and confusion of loss is still in her heart. And as she regains her memories, she becomes sweeter and more passionate about defending all the life in the multiverse. And the more that happens, the more desperate she is to save her former love. This is a great character arc. And if I'm remembering correctly, the first time a main party member has had a big changing story that covers the entire game in the series. Probably the closest comparison would be Peach in the Thousand Year Door, but she was a piece in the puzzle and not part of the main party in that game. Although not every character in this game reaches the staggering heights of the Thousand Year Door's character writing, most of them stick the landing. Having some stumbles is more than okay, but given how well the last two games handled this, I think Super making some mistakes is a valid complaint. I, like with Paper Mario 64, feel quite mixed about this game's soundtrack. From what I was able to find, the game's soundtrack was composed by Naoko Mitome and Chika Sekigawa. Mitome had worked on WarioWare Smooth Moves just the previous year, and you can definitely feel their influence here. Sekigawa worked on Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn, which also came out around that time period. Those are the faces, but what about the music? Well, again, you can definitely feel the WarioWare influence here, as a lot of it is excessively bouncy, full of amorphous time signatures and blendings of sounds. Sometimes it really works, and sometimes it really doesn't. I found that the more simple the themes stayed, the more enjoyable they were, but whenever it got really crazy, I didn't love it as much and wanted to skip over those tracks. But I'm here to focus on the ones I really liked, and I really like the character themes in this game, so we'll start there. Bowser, O'Chunks, Mimi, Dementio, Mr. L, and Count Bleck have the absolute best character themes in the series. And you know what, same for the Pixel theme in King Crocus's little ditty too. They all stay easy enough to follow, but their wackiness also tells you a lot about the character's various flavors too. A lot of the area themes are just as catchy and lovably goofy, and some of the event themes aren't bad either. They all fit their levels and situations to a T. Here's the best level themes. And here are the best of the many event themes. Some of the boss themes are total bops too, although I think most of them are a bit too obnoxious for their own good. As for the best ones, I think they fit the platforming nature of these fights quite well and manage to have a lot of personality to them as well. I'm not sure if you noticed this too or if I'm going crazy, but a lot of these instruments have this weird compression filter on them that drives me nuts sometimes. But most of the time it isn't that bad. I just wanted to point it out real quick. Like 64, this soundtrack has its moments, but it stumbles almost as much as that game and becomes pretty grating on the ears in more than a few places. That's why I think out of the games I've looked at, the Thousand Year Door has the best soundtrack by a landslide, and I still think that game's music has a lot more personality than the later trilogy, despite those games' original soundtracks being just as much of a bop. Origami King's soundtrack is a close second in the whole series tier list, but it has enough boring themes to make it stay in that second place spot. But anyways, that's enough music stuff. Get it? Cause that's the official name of the final boss theme. Cool, let's move on. This final chapter is really the best in the original trilogy because the stakes are consistently high, and they actually keep getting higher. Bowser's Castle had a sense of escalating tension via dynamic music, which worked perfectly in its own way. TTYD's conclusion had fairly consistent tension, so it kinda got into a groove before ramping it up to an 11. But this finale keeps getting crazier. The actual levels are just okay, to be honest, but that's about par for the course with this game. The atmosphere of the castle with the stark blacks and whites and the absolutely dire music, which combines the flip side and Count Bleck motifs we've been hearing throughout the game as well as just a few minutes ago in this video, really sell this climax. But the story aspects are what keep everything bananas. At the end of each stage, you face off one last time with each of Count Bleck's goons. These showdowns stick out even more by having you do a one-on-one using specific characters. Bowser takes on Ochunks, Peach takes on Mimi, and Luigi takes on Dimentio. But after each of these fights, they get stuck in a horrid life or death situation and the party grows smaller and smaller until it's just Mario, Tippy, and the pixels again, like at the beginning of the game. This is for sure the darkest Mario game. The final boss has a lot of phases. I mean, what'd you expect at this point? But due to the basic platforming gameplay, I think it's the weakest final fight we've seen in this retrospective. Count Bleck is just a bounce fest, and Super Dimentio is absolutely pathetic. If you use Bowser and jump on exactly the right set of platforms, you can corner him and hit him over and over again. See, here I am again, drawing out this paragraph in the script and also this voice line as I record it right now, and you've seen the entirety of the final boss fight. Good job, Nintendo. Not to mention, I think The Ultimate Show as a song is kind of overrated. The instruments and rhythms have always just kind of bothered me. They really get on my nerves. Sorry, but obviously that is my opinion. Still, all the story stuff that happens at this ending really works. Count Bleck and Tippy still fighting till almost death despite having finally been reunited, Nastasia sacrificing herself for the Count, Dimentio using Luigi as a host for the Chaos Heart to create a huge abomination. It all sets the stage for an intense battle, and everything ending on the wedding, which saves the multiverse, may be cheesy in a way, but I don't care. The romance between these two has been built up for so long, and it's been in tragedy mode for like 90% of the game, so these two having a happy ending is the only ending they deserved. You even get to see them being happy together in whatever dimension they got warped to after the credits, which is frankly beautiful. It's the only ending I could envision for this game. Super Paper Mario will never not be weird to talk about. The gameplay and art style are a complete departure from everything the first two games were built on, to a very mixed result. The soundtrack is all out goofy to a very mixed result. The chapters and humor aim to be the funniest in the series to a mixed result. And the storyline is the most dramatic I think Mario has ever been or ever will be, which is obviously a little polarizing. But I'm honestly more surprised I ended up enjoying Super as much as I did. As a reminder, this has been my third full playthrough of the game, and I really didn't like the first two. But for some reason, the game really clicked with me this time. The platforming is competent, the exploration is usually pretty alright, and the combat is enjoyable on a surface level. The puzzles being brought to the forefront really just shows how mediocre they've always been in this series, and the combat has barely any complexity, and your moves can all be easily abused to gain the advantage. A few of the experimental gameplay styles and some of the characters and storylines actually suck, and I hate them so much. So much. But on the whole, I found myself falling for this game. I could feel the joy and passion and energy the team put into this weird experiment shining through. That's what I love most about this series, that it always does something crazy and unpredictable, and it's what I again found here. I guess you could say I had my own little tragic love story with this thing. It's nowhere close to as great a game as its predecessors, but there's something there, and this game is definitely special. I finally found that in this run, and I will find myself revisiting Super Paper Mario again, but like in a very long time. I need to not play Paper Mario for like a year. Before I end things for good, I should probably talk about the other three games to any extent. Mario RPGs have always been about messing with the typical RPG formula, but Super Paper Mario started a trend of messing with the Paper Mario formula. The following three games have all been drastically different from these originals in art direction and creative ambition and in gameplay styles. Heck, they're all very different from each other. Now, I've played a bit of Sticker Star, but I hated it and I never finished it. I never owned a Wii U, so Color Splash isn't a game I've even been able to touch. Origami King showed me that this series is still great though, even without original characters and EXP and traditional turn-based combat. So I'm okay with saying I still love this series and its experiments, even if we're in a totally different place from where we began. Maybe someday I'll boot up some emulators and give these three a spin, but I need a break for now. Here's my final parting thoughts. Thanks for supporting this little project of mine. As somebody on the autism spectrum, I don't often find outlets to get all my special interest energy out. So this YouTube community has really been, well, okay, not exactly a blessing. Being able to monetize this would be a blessing, but it has helped me love myself a bit more. I love these games, and I love that I got the chance to share my passion with other passionate people. And it's because of that experience that this retrospective has been mostly a blast to work on, give or take various real-life circumstances. Thank you, and I will see y'all for whatever I decide to cook up next. But I can promise it will not be Mario related.